Hi, I'm Larry Ferlazzo, and I teach English, Social Studies, and International Baccalaureate classes at Luther Burbank High School in Sacramento, California. And today what I'd like to do is to talk about motivation. Years ago, I spent a fair amount of time running soup kitchens and emergency shelters on a couple of skid rows in California. And one day, it was my job to go into the front porch and sweep. So I went out in the porch and was sweeping around many of the guys who were passed out on the porch. And while I was doing this, a police cruiser came by and stopped in front of our house. Officer got out, started yelling at me, justifiably, about how we didn't really control what was going on. There were lots of complaints from neighbors. And it was true, we were well-meaning folks, didn't really know a whole lot about what we were doing. In the midst of his tirade, one of the guys who had been passed out pulled himself up on the banister and yelled out, "Officer, officer, Larry tries, he tries real hard. We just don't listen to him." And that story has stayed with me for a long time. And I think because it illustrates the issue of, do we want to be right or do we want to be effective? And most of us feel like we're right most of the time, particularly when we want other people to do things. You know, our kids should want to clean their room because it's the right thing to do. In the classroom, our students should appreciate the fact that we spend a lot of time on a lesson that should be engaging. And when we don't get the reaction that we expect, we often get frustrated. And the challenge, I think, to me, and I think to many educators, is to figure out how, as Ken Robinson says, we can create the conditions in which students can bring the desire and passion to the classroom, the same kind of desire and passion they bring to other aspects of their lives, whether it's in sports teams, whether it's caring for younger siblings. And so when we look at how we can do that, I would suggest that one common way that's done won't work, and that's extrinsic motivation. Plenty of research from Edward Deci, Daniel Pink, explains that extrinsic motivation, rewards, incentives, threats, works for basic manual kind of tasks, but is not effective and is actually destructive towards higher level creative thinking. Nobody wants to be treated like a rat in a maze. So, of course, sometimes we all use extrinsic motivation. In a classroom, sometimes I've got to do that to get one student on task so I can get back to 30 other students. But in that kind of situation, we want to have an exit strategy, a plan to talk afterwards. And of course, another aspect of this, Daniel Pink talks about it in terms of baseline rewards, that all of us need some kind of rewards, and if we don't, some baseline things, we won't get any motivation at all. So for example, in a classroom, some baseline rewards would be a clean classroom, a teacher who spends some time in developing lesson plans, who's somewhat relational, that we all need to have those kind of basic elements in place, or else there'll be no kind of motivation. So if extrinsic motivation is going to work, what will? And I think what we can do is to try to create the conditions where intrinsic motivation will flourish. And plenty of researchers find that there are 4 elements of that. One is autonomy, where people have some power in determining how and what they do. Competence, where people feel they have got a good odds of success at accomplishing the task. The third aspect is relatedness, that what they're doing will hopefully create some kind of closer relationship with people they care about, whom they respect. And the fourth quality is relevance, that what they're doing will help them achieve their visions, their goals, or will connect to their interests. So I'd like to spend a short period of time giving a few examples for each of those. For autonomy, one thing that teachers can do is obviously choice. And there are two types of choice. Procedural choice, which is where you're going to sit, what group do you want to be part of, and then cognitive choice, which is what researchers have found to be more effective in cultivating intrinsic motivation. So cognitive choice is, what would be useful homework for you? What would, in project-based learning or problem-based learning, what do you want to study? An example in my classroom last week, which is sort of a hybrid, in my class of English language learners, we looked at their cell phone use had been getting a little out of control. So I put 2 columns on the board, good and bad, and elicited from students what they thought would be appropriate and good use for cell phones in the classroom, using Google Translate, dictionary, and what would be inappropriate, texting, music, and then in that kind of conversation, I also explored what would be reasonable consequences. The second aspect of intrinsic motivation is the idea of competence. A few things we can do. Carol Dweck talks a lot about the importance of praise for effort as opposed to natural intelligence. Praising John for spending an extra amount of time on crafting a very good conclusion to his essay, as opposed to saying, boy, John, you're such a great writer. By encouraging effort, students are going to be more likely to be willing to work hard and to risk mistakes than if we are just praising natural intelligence, where they will be less likely to want to risk their looking like geniuses. The second way that we can promote competence is by helping students see their own growth. For example, in a unit, I'll give a list of words and ask at the beginning of the unit and ask students which list the words that you know. At the end of the unit, they'll look at the same list and compare the two and see how much they gained. A third aspect related to competence is Nobel Prize-winning Richard Feynman talked about this idea of what I cannot create, I cannot understand. The idea of students creating their own knowledge, whether it is through teaching others in particular, the jigsaw activity. A lot of research has shown that students teaching other students really enhances student achievement, or a number of other aspects. Inductive learning, the idea of providing students examples, and then students develop concepts from those examples. Whether you're going to give students a bunch of materials and they have to see if it floats, and out of that they can develop the concept of what the density of water is. Then the idea of relatedness. Robert Marzano talks about if the relationship is good between teacher and student, everything else is better in the classroom. I was a community organizer for 19 years, and we call community organizing just a different word for relationship building. I think teaching is the same way. By developing relationships, we can also help tailor our lessons in a way that is more relevant to student dreams and hopes. One time in my English class, students were writing a persuasive essay about what would be the worst natural disaster to experience. One student who was very resistant wasn't interested in doing that, but I knew that he was interested in football. And so I asked him, well, why don't you just write a persuasive essay about what the best NFL team is? He said, oh, I can do that? He wrote a great essay, and it was, in fact, the first essay he'd written in 2 years. The final aspect of intrinsic motivation is this idea of relevance. And researchers have found even having students write a short paragraph after a lesson about how they think they can apply what they just learned dramatically enhances student achievement. This idea of transfer of knowledge, which is in many ways the key element of education. We want students to be able to take what they learn and apply it to different situations. We're not trying to raise people who are good at test taking. You know, all of this, in some ways, by some people, could be viewed as teachers giving up power. And in community organizing, we talked a lot about how power is not a finite pie. That if someone gets some power, it doesn't mean that we have less. It means the whole pie gets bigger, and the more opportunities are created. Walter Isaacson, in his biography of Steve Jobs, said that Jobs, when he came back to Apple the second time, by giving up power, he gained more control. So I think the challenge to all of our teachers is to recognize that by giving up a little more power, we can create lots of additional possibilities for ourselves and for our students.